Everybody coming out tonight, as we always do. And again, if anybody has any other ideas for topics, and you have somebody that speaks on that topic, please let me know, and I will be more than happy to investigate that. First of all, next month, the May 8th meeting will be presented by Tammi, and she's the owner, operator, and designer of Posh Places from Poland, Ohio. And she will be presenting the program entitled The Impact of the Industrial Revolution on Home Interiors. So that should be an interesting, different type of topic. However, tonight, speaker is Tammi Mackey, who is from the historic Zoar Village in Fort Lawrence, and she's the site director of those locations. A little information about Tammi. She has served in the position since October of 2015. She holds a bachelor's degree in history and anthropology from Kent State, and a master's degree in public history from the University of Akron. From 2009 to 2017, she served as curator, then director, of the J.E. Reeves Victorian Home and the museum in Dover, and was acting site manager for Fort Lawrence, creating new programs, enhancing the field trips experience for Ohio's only Revolutionary War-era fort, and she'll be, I'm sure, telling us a little bit about that too. Mackey is a board member of the Tuscarawas County Convention and Visitor Bureau, and was also named 2012's Emerging Professional of the Year by the Ohio Museum Association. She does reside in Canton with her husband and her 4 babies. However, tonight, Tammi will be presenting the history of Zoar Village, its founding, lifestyle, and of course the preservation efforts that they've always gone under. So, no further ado, I'll introduce Tammi.
Is it on? Yes. Okay. All right. All right. I'm going to try to flip this around. All right. I'm going to do this. Let me get out of the way. I'm going to do this a little bit differently. I made it out of wax. Hold on. Okay. All right. We're not used to this technology in Zoar, so. I like to do things just a little bit differently. I have an outline, I have everything, but if you guys want to go somewhere completely different, I will go there with you. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Zoar, and if you have a burning question that comes up, feel free to ask, and then like I said, if that takes us in a different path, then that's the path that we will choose to go on. Today is actually a very fitting day for me to be here talking with you guys. Today is the anniversary of when the separatists left Germany. They left on this date from Antwerp in 1817, and they started their journey to the United States. They were actually escaping religious persecution. Germany was not a country like it is today. At the time, there were German states. Each one had a different ruler. And then pretty much in Germany, you had the choice of being Catholic or Lutheran, and that depended on what state you resided in. So they did not want to fit into the Lutheran church, so they started practicing separately. They separated themselves, so you have the separatists. So that's how their religion got started. They were jailed, their children were taken away from them, all because they wouldn't follow the exact protocols that the Lutheran church wanted them to follow. One of the biggest differences was they had a female mystic that they followed her predictions and kind of her interpretation of the Bible. They were also millennialists, which meant that they thought, I think it was 1832, that the world was going to end. So they came to the United States. It took them about 3 months to cross the ocean, which I cannot imagine a 3-month ship trip. They were helped by the Quakers, first the Quakers out of London and then the Quakers in Philadelphia. They stayed in Philadelphia for quite a while, and they were worked as indentured servants and tried to save up money so that they could get their own property. The Quakers really wanted them to stay in Philadelphia or stay somewhere in Pennsylvania, but they actually bought some land from a Revolutionary War veteran in Ohio, and that's how they founded Zoar. Zoar gets its name from the Bible, actually. It is the place that after Sodom and Gomorrah, that's where Lot fled. He fled to Zoar, so this was their safe haven, and that's how Zoar got its name. I have a bunch of pictures. All right, I am a very visual person, so I like to have a lot of pictures. So if anyone walked past my slideshow and saw 41 slides, don't worry, it's not all information, it's mostly pictures. This is a picture of some of the separatists. Men and women worked equally in Zoar. 1817 is when Zoar was founded. They tried it a couple years in the traditional sense that every household had its own farm, everyone was working on their own. They really could not make it work. There were about 230 that originally founded Zoar, but about 70% of them were women or elderly. So they decided in 1819 the whole community got together. They voted and they became a communal settlement. And they lived communally from 1819 until 1898. And what that meant, and it's communism with a lowercase c, not a capital C. So they all worked for the greater good. Everything was supplied to them, all their clothing, all of their baked goods, all of the eggs, cheese, housing, everything was provided to them. But then in return, you didn't get any money for your work. If you needed something, it was provided to you. So like if you needed a new dress, you didn't really have a choice of going out and getting one. Here's the one that you do get. And that's why a lot of the dresses, a lot of the ladies are matching. You get in one fold of fabric. Everything was made right there in Zoar. They had just about every industry you can imagine. They had it there in Zoar. I know a lot of you have said that you have been down to Zoar, and right now the town goes from about 1st Street through 7th Street. At one point they owned 5,000 acres down there in Tuscarawas County. So pretty much from Dover in Tuscarawas County up to almost that Stark County line, and then all the way over to Sandyville, and then past Bolivar on the other side. So they owned pretty much northern Tuscarawas County at one point. So much larger territory at one point. A lot of farmlands, pretty much any crop you could name, they grew it. They had iron ores, they had furnace factories, they had a brewery, they had a cider mill. They weren't afraid of drink. Just because they were religious doesn't mean that they weren't afraid of drink. So they actually had the cider mill, which I have a picture of. The cider mill would make its way out to the fields, but that might actually be it in the background there, and it would make its way to the fields, and you could, have a cider break after you were working in the fields. So since they were communal living, everyone did their part. Women worked in the fields. Even the children, the boys did basket weaving, the girls did the babysitting or had another task that they would do. Everyone had to work to earn their keep. But also being equal, 1819, when they start the communal society, women are given the right to vote. So in any action that they have in the community, the women can vote on that, and the women could actually hold office as well. None of them did hold office, but that's about 100 years before women's suffrage in general, so they were ahead of their time in that sense. I'll go to the next picture. This is some more of the field work, and you can see kind of the same dress. And they also, about the 1850s, time kind of stops in Zoar, and a lot of the dress, a lot of the clothing, a lot of everything stays the same. So it's really kind of hard to tell once they do allow, photography in the village. It's hard to tell what era you're in, just because they don't really start to change clothes until after they dissolve. That's the cider wagon. So imagine that rolling around town. I said that's something we need to bring back. And that was out of the cider mill, which today is a B&B and a crafting retreat. But yeah, that whole thing was full of cider, and they had, the whole garden was lined with apple orchards. And they did have hard cider too, so it wasn't just, regular cider, there was hard cider. But water wasn't safe to drink back then, so we'll say that's their excuse. This is the organ in the church. The church was built in 1853, and they put the organ in that same year, and that organ is still there, and it still plays. So if you're ever, if you ever get a chance to go to the Zoar church and hear the organ play, it is a real treat. It is now United Church of Christ. which is a division of Lutheranism, which is very ironic. So we're there in Zoar. Here are some of the separatists. You hear quite a bit if people are talking about Zoar. Some people will say Zoarites, but we like to call them separatists. They call themselves separatists, but if I was an outsider looking in, I would call them a Zoarite. So we like to think that we're one with them, so we call them separatists. And you can see you have kind of on the left is one of the more old guard Zoar. He would have been set in the ways and wanted everything to stay the same. And even though he looks just as old, the guy on the right would have been more okay with outsiders coming in and kind of the outside world and things changing a little bit. And the reason I say that is when they first came, it was just like the Amish, where they did not wear the mustache. And then the left, no mustache, right? He does have a mustache. And the reason the separatists did that, and why the Amish do that today, is a lot of the soldiers, a lot of the Jaegers would have mustaches, and that was a symbol of the military. So to show that they were opposed to the military, and they were pacifists, they would not wear the mustache like a soldier would. So, but yeah, they chose at the beginning not to wear their mustaches. Next, no. This is a good demonstration of communal living and everyone doing their part. So you have a bunch of girls lined up in front of the number 1 house there. They're all in the same style of dress. They're all in the same style of boots, same style of hat, same style of carriage. And then they all have a baby to watch, or a couple babies to watch. Now this is on the Ohio and Erie Canal. This is another industry that they had. The separatists actually helped build 7 miles of the Ohio and Erie Canal. It actually ironically started over at Fort Lawrence and took out the back half of the fort. So we're running 2 sites now where one destroyed the other back in the day. But they built 7 miles of the canal, including 4 locks. And they were able to take the money that they got from building the canal. They paid off all of their land debts. And then after that, I mean, just because they lived communally doesn't mean that as a whole they weren't rich, and they were very, very well off. They didn't live that way, but once the canal came through, all those industries that they did have, they started shipping up and down the canal. They built an inn on the canal in which the canalers would stay, because they did build the 4 locks, and I'm sure, as you guys know, locks take a very long time to go through, especially if you're a busy intersection. The inn on the river, which I'm sure some of you guys have been down there, the inn on the river, it did get too busy to the point where they had to build another hotel in town in 1833. So it really kind of kicked off Zoar and made it a booming place, and it eventually led also to tourism, which I'll get to later, which tourism in Zoar was a good thing, but it was also a bad thing in the end. So you have the canal, you have the success coming in, and it really starts to grow Zoar. I'm trying to figure out where I am. Now with the canal, and they're building the 7 miles, they decided this is really good for Zoar. They want to get that land debt paid off. They want everybody to be doing their part. So at this point, they separate the boys and the girls, and they each have a dormitory that they stay in. They're separated from their parents. They got to see them Sundays during church, and then they could go and visit their children in the dorms. And also at that point, they decided, as a society, that they are going to live as brothers and sisters in Christ. So even if my husband and I were married previously, we are separated, and the men and the women live separately. And they enter into about a 10-year period of celibacy, just to make sure that there are no children to be watching. The women aren't taken out of commission for 9+ months for, childbirth, and then to take care of the infants. So they really put everything they have into building the canal. But once the canal was built, the dormitories, kind of ease back, and the children are allowed back in the households. Celibacy is lifted. One of the first 3 marriages was actually Joseph Beimiller, who was one of the leaders of Zoar. So I don't know if he lifted celibacy because the canal were because he wanted to get married and he had met Dorothea, but that's a whole other theory in itself. So they do have descendants now because they did live to that period of celibacy, but they really put their mind to whatever they were doing. They went full for it, like full force. So that was about 10 years of celibacy there. And then this is, sorry guys, I wish I had a clicker. This is August Burkhardt. He is one of the master weavers in Zoar. The Zoar coverlets are one of the items that went up and down the canal. And they also went over to Old Economy in Pennsylvania, which is another communal settlement. You'll see a lot of Zoar's coverlets over there. Also the Amana colonies out in Iowa. Same kind of idea of religion, all from Germany, all separatist in nature. So he is one of the skilled workers that they did have there in Zoar. And their furniture and their coverlets were a very popular item. And you see the furniture and the stoves and the coverlets kind of everywhere out in Zoar. We're slowly getting pieces back in. And you talk about like the dovetailing and the details and just the beautiful craftsmanship. You know, they had tiger maple quite a bit. So it's really a treat if you're down in Zoar to see some of the Zoar furniture pieces. And everything they made, whether it's the coverlets or the stove or even the buildings, they're very simplistic in nature, but there's just enough of a little flourish to them to make them not just completely plain. All the architecture in town reflects their European background. The buildings look like just something you just plucked right up out of Germany and put right here in Ohio. And even all of the basements have tall, at least 12-foot, if not 15-foot ceilings, and they're all vaulted like they would have had in Germany. Even some of them have like a false vault where it just has the appearance of the vault. But there's an actual ceiling above it in the cellar. So they really went through, you know, painstaking detail to make it feel as close to Germany as what they could, which is another reason why future tourists back then and today really love to see Zoar. All right. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is the back of the Zoar Hotel. But that is the garbage wagon. So he probably didn't want that job, but the garbage wagon went around to collect everything. Looks kind of like the cider wagon though too, so I'd be kind of leery of what I was getting out of the tap there. But
It's not very large for a trash bin.
it is pretty large for a trash bin, but he was going, the hotel slept 80, and then you were going around to all of the village, and at any given point there's usually about 250 separatists, but they also had hired hands too that they took care of. So there's, you know, up to 500 people living in the village, and he would have made his rounds out to Zoarville, out to the station, the train station later, and then kind of all around. So yeah, it's a lot, but and I'm sure it was mostly like compost type trash that eventually went to the animals. I was going to say the pigs, but they didn't raise pigs until later because they thought pigs were unclean. So they brought them in later for the hotel. This is the early fire brigade. Zoar has one of the longest standing volunteer fire departments in Ohio. So they're very proud of that, and that's, you can tell these guys are very proud of their fire wagon there. That is not the town hall, but the fire wagon was kept in the town hall, and if you're down there in Zoar, the big double doors that are in front of the town hall, that was for the fire wagon to come in and out of. This is the blacksmith, and a little girl waiting for her horse to be done. They did have musical entertainment. So like I said, just because they lived communally and they were really just didn't mean that they played. They still had their entertainment. These guys would play around town, usually Saturday nights, or they would go on the town hall. There's a balcony. They'd go up there and play out to everybody as they listened, and they played for the visitors that were in town. They'd also go and do excursions down to like New Philadelphia, Dover, up to Canton. That is one of their canal boats. They did own 3 canal boats, which brought in quite a bit of income for them. And I read and I reread and I read again this one document, and it seems like it's wrong, but the boat captain got $50 a week, which seems like an unheard of wage. But you read it and you have someone look at it again, and we all came to the same thing. It's $50 a week for a boat captain, which back then, it's a very dangerous job, but I mean, that's a job I think you would want. One of their other industries, lumber, not only for their own goods, but then to ship up and down the canal. This is the Zoarville station. When the railroad did come through, they convinced the Baltimore and Ohio to come through. So there was a station in Zoarville. President McKinley was in and out of this station quite a bit. He was also a frequent guest of the Zoar Hotel. And this is just one of those cool pictures where you have all these different modes of transportation, because you have the river, the canal, and the towpath, and then the railroad all going past Zoar. Now this is the Zoar Garden. Yes, so I'll talk about the garden a little bit. Now, being a religious settlement, they built a garden in the center of town. It was a 2.5 acre garden, which for them to have all these industries, all these fields, all these everything, it was unusual for right in the center of town to have this 2.5 acre garden. And the garden was just for pleasure. They called it the Lust Garden, kind of roughly translate to lust garden. But it was supposed to be a very symbolic, very meditative space for them. There was no vegetables grown in it. There were some apple orchards along the outside of the garden. But it was a very special place for the separatists. This is Simon Biter, the gardener. You can kind of see the tree in the center, and then I have a nice aerial shot that you'll be able to see. But the garden was laid out according to the book of Revelations as to what New Jerusalem was supposed to look like. So you have, there's a very large tree in the center that represents Christ. Around the large tree are 12 smaller trees, which represented the 12 apostles. And then there's all these different paths to get to the middle. But the easiest way to get to the center is, of course, on that straight and narrow. And there's also a whole outer perimeter where the orchards were that represented the outside world. And from the outside world, you can eventually find a path that gets you to that middle tree. But it was very, very symbolic. And we have it today, the garden is restored to what the paths and the layout were back when the separatists had it. A little bit after dissolution, for a while it was tennis courts and some other things. So now it is back to being a garden in the center of town for what the people of Zoar imagined it to be. But here is an older aerial shot of the garden. You can see the large center tree with the 12 smaller around it. And then we're looking right down that straight and narrow path right to the center. That tree is not the one that is standing now. Legend has it that Simon Biter got so upset whenever the people of Zoar dissolved and decided not to be a commune anymore, that he took out his anger and he chopped down the tree because he said everything was done. So he chopped down the tree, upset. So the tree that we have now was planted in the 1930s, but it still kind of has that same similar layout.
Is it large?
It is large, yeah. Yeah, it's a really tall tree that's kind of leaning now, but this one's kind of leaning also. But it's large. The 12 apostles are also quite large. It really drapes down too. And it's neat when you go in the garden even today, because the way the tree drapes down, which all around that's what they called heaven, was right in the centrum there. And then we have tall hibiscus and other tall trees. And it's really, or other tall bushes and flowers, and it's neat because you feel like you can get lost in there. And it's just kind of you and the plants and the butterflies and the bees, and it's just this beautiful space.
This is all at the museum?
Yeah, this is all, yeah, our museum, we are a 14 building complex, and we have the garden, so pretty much half of the town is the museum, so
Wow.
residents kind of have to know when they move in there that they're moving into the museum a little bit. And all of Zoar, from 1st Street to 5th Street, is now a National Historic Landmark District. And then a lot of the houses beyond that are still Zoar houses, but there's some modern houses too. But it is a National Historic Landmark District, which is one of the rarest things to be, because usually you don't have enough of a place preserved to have an entire district. You usually just have a couple houses. This is the outside of the garden. There is a spring, a natural spring that goes through Zoar. We still have that today, and it's a water fountain, so you can get some of the Zoar spring water. That was something that brought in tourists too for the healing properties of the water, of the mineral water. It's a nice, lovely stroll through the garden. This is the greenhouse. It was one of the first greenhouses in Ohio. We still have an operating greenhouse today. It was one of the only places in Northeast Ohio that had a lemon tree. So a lot of people would come and get citrus and different fruit from the gardens of Zoar. Doctors from all over would kind of ask for the lemons for cases of scurvy or different things. And you can see there's quite a different variety of plants in there, and a parrot. If you can kind of see the parrot up above the air plant looking terrarium one. So, and that is the garden today. So you can see the garden house at the bottom of the screen, which is where the greenhouse is. The center tree, heaven around it, and then you can see that straight and narrow path, and then some of the ways to get in, and that's how they had it laid out. We also put the Zoar star. It's on the left bottom corner. And the patch that you see that's brown, we do have some vegetables in there today. We grow some vegetables that they would have had in their side gardens, just to kind of demonstrate some of the different foods that they would have grown. All right, this is, they were pacifist in nature, but there were 16 Civil War soldiers that came from Zoar. And this is kind of when you start to see that outside world really having an influence on their little tight-knit community, because a lot of the veterans had this choice of following the religion, which at that point was a lot of it was the religion of their parents. Do you follow the religion of your parents, or do you go fight for this Union cause? And they were staunch abolitionists. We have no record to indicate that they ever helped anybody on the Underground Railroad, but they viewed everyone as a brother and sister in Christ, so they didn't agree with slavery or the idea of it. So this flag actually lists some of the names of the veterans. 2 of them did die in the Civil War. Both was from disease, and one of the soldiers spent some time in Andersonville, but he actually survived to make it home. So this is one of the veterans, and then they did have the flag. So that's an interesting aspect of Zoar, is they were pacifists by nature, but sometimes, cause and country kind of outweighed their own religious beliefs. The old leaders were not happy at all that these boys went off and fought this war, but they did support the cause. And Zoar is actually, across the state, one of the biggest contributors money-wise to the Ohio cause of the Civil War, because they were constantly paying for replacements so that their people didn't have to go off. So they contributed quite a lot of money to the Civil War, just so most of their able-bodied men did not have to go and fight. All right, this is the hotel. It was built in 1833. We say that it slept 80. There are different rooms on the 1st and 2nd floor, and then the 3rd floor was set up like a hostel. So there's bunking systems. That's why we say slept 80 as opposed to having 80 rooms. There is lock and bars that go up to the 3rd floor, and we go back and forth between different thoughts. I think they locked the canalers up there because they thought the canalers were rowdy and wild, and they didn't want them running amok in Zoar after hours. Some people also say that the ladies that worked in the hotel, they locked those up there. So we usually call it the maiden door if you're ever on a tour. I don't know which one is right. There's no documentation. Third theory, which is probably actually the case, towards the end of Zoar's life as a community, there was an outsider that the people of Zoar let live in Zoar, and he rented out and stayed on the whole 3rd floor of the hotel. So he probably put the lock up there just because he rented out the entire 3rd floor, and it probably has the bars because it's the 3rd floor of a building with no air conditioning. So he probably wanted as much ventilation going through there as what he could. So it's always a mystery to know what our maiden doors actually are for. I do have a picture. This one was from 1833. They did add on a hotel addition in 1897 that is very much different. Everything keeps the European architecture until you get to the addition of the hotel, and it's very Queen Anne, it's very Victorian, it is very much not Zoar. And the trustees who were running Zoar at the time, they described the new addition to the hotel, they thought it was going to be a cash cow, which is really not like them, to be looking out for money as opposed to be looking out for themselves as a settlement. So you can really tell that that was the beginning of the end. But Zoar had become such a popular tourist destination. People loved to go and look at these weird Germans with their weird style of dress, their weird beards. They'd go and eat their home-cooked food and go around in their wagons and see their quaint style of life that was just so old-fashioned. And does it sound familiar, like anything that we do now? Right, like Dutch Valley and Berlin and going all those places. So in a way, the people of Zoar, in that sense, were very close to the Amish. And they were also very close to the Amish in that they saw people were coming there to view them as a tourist attraction. So they built a hotel. They started doing the wagon rides. They started doing bicycle tours. They started kind of playing it up for that tourist, element to come in. And in later years, they were making more money off the tourists than they were their goods. And they started buying goods from the outside instead of making their own products. And it was also a point of contention because I'm a nice rich guest from Cleveland. You're just a separatist working in the field. So all of the best eggs, cheese, butter, all the best everything was given to the hotel. So it really started to cause problems because I'm working, you're supposed to be providing for me, and then they're getting the best of everything. So it really hit a sore spot with the community at large.
When did they quit using the canal?
The canal, they would use it up until, even after they dissolved in 1898, they would still use part of it for different places just like everyone else until about 1913.
Okay, that's
Like as a community, 1898 when they dissolved, but there were still individuals that would use it for like boating and different stuff, and it was still in existence until the flood that wiped out the canal in general. Yeah. These are some of the hotel workers, which you can see they're dressed a lot more modern in their sense, modern, than what a lot of the other people of Zoar were. And this was another sore spot, and I'm really not sure why they started doing it. But if you worked in the hotel, you got to keep any tips that you were given. So before this, you're working in the field, you're working in the dairy, you're not getting any money whatsoever. And then they open the hotel, you got a pretty scullery maid, she's getting tips all day. She starts buying pretty ribbons and different material, and it really, you already have these sore spots growing, and that really kind of added to it because now you have this inequality coming in, and everyone wanted to work in the hotel, and why do I have to go in the dairy whenever, she's got it easier in the hotel. And so this was really the start of the beginning of the end. This is the addition to the hotel. You see it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb. Looks nothing like the rest of Zoar. It is no longer there. It was torn down in 1947. It is where the parking lot for the visitor center is today. There is the hotel again. You can see the bicycle tours they had out front there. They also built it in a hurry. Between approval and it opening was 9 months, which was way too quick. And they talk about visitors complaining because water is just pouring down the walls when it rained because they just built everything as quick as they could with the cheapest materials they could because they were just really looking forward to this cash cow that they we're supposed to be planning.
So what happened to what happened? Did it fall down?
Well, they tore it down in 1947, and it was kind of beyond the point of even starting to repair it because it had been built so poorly to begin with that, I mean, you may as well just build a whole new structure that looked like it by the time you fixed everything. This is Alexander Gunn. He is the one that rented out the 3rd floor of the hotel. He was a very wealthy man from Cleveland. He was friends with presidents and industrialists and all sorts of, hoity-toities, high-to-dos. He came down to Zoar. A lot of artists had been visiting Zoar and doing paintings. So he came down with some of his artist friends, fell in love with the place, convinced the trustees to let him live in the 3rd floor of the hotel, also convinced them to let him buy one of the 1817 original cabins. He called it the Hermitage. So he's living in the cabin, or he doesn't live in the cabin, he keeps the cabin, lives in the hotel. He does take care of it. He really loves Zoar. And he had a rose garden that had 200 and something variety of roses. He was really always working in the garden, and so a lot of people point to him as the downfall of Zoar, but he hated the new hotel just as much as the people of Zoar did. And he talks about the infestation of the summer boarders coming in, and it's nothing like who used to visit, Zoar. So, and he did, after they dissolved, he bought the brewery and turned it into a library, and he did stay there in Zoar. So, it goes back to kind of debating your thought on Alexander Gunn, but a lot of people point to him as the downfall of everything. This is him and his gun club. He's the one lounging in the front there. The guys that were in his club, either the artists or the trustees, they called themselves the Gun Club, and they'd have these late night dinner parties. I'm sure the cider wagon just parked itself right outside. So a lot of the people of Zoar did not like those late night parties and the excessive drinking, because they would drink and they had the brewery and they had the cider mill, but it was never to excess. And their drinking and partying was. So
So what happened?
what happened to?
Did they oust him? What did they do? They didn't.
No, he stayed there.
Yeah.
Well, 1898 they dissolved, and this is a group of surveyors. The way they dissolved too, if you operated a business, that business then became yours. So the proprietors of the hotel got the hotel. Whoever was in charge of the store got the store. The baker got the bakery. The blacksmith got the blacksmith shop. And they thought that was at the time the most fair way to do it. If you were just a field hand, they did the survey, and as they were selling off all that land, they divided it amongst everyone else equally, and you got the cash, or you could choose to buy a part of the land to farm yourself. But it's kind of going into this strange new world, because the person that had the hotel, they were fine. They knew how money and industry and everything worked. But as a laborer that was mostly doing the field work, you've never handled money before. You've never had property of your own. You might not have a house at this point, so you got to try to find someone. Hey, can I stay with you? Kind of a thing. So dissolution was good in theory. Like I said, some people made out way better than other people did. And the people that did run the hotel, they ran it until 1901, when the lady in charge did pass away. She was 98, and she ran it for every single day of her life except for 4 days. So this kind of shows some of the subdivision. And at this point, they had sold off some of their land at this point too, because without the industry, they're not really bringing in the money like they had been in the beginning either. So this was the subdivision. This was the announcement of their sale. So 1898. And it's interesting too, because you see John Bymiller down there. After Joseph Bymiller, the leader, most of his children and then grandchildren did not join the society. You could stay in Zoar and not join the society, and then as a hired hand, you were given money and cash and store credits, and so they did let outsiders stay in if they were working for them, but you had to be doing something for Zoar to be able to stay in Zoar. So this is another picture of their communal living and their hats, which are very interesting. That was a very distinctive style to the ladies of Zoar. That is one of the vaulted basements, the vaulted ceiling. That's actually in the #1 house. But all of them have an arch vault in them. It's like a pub, but you can still eat in Zoar. Yes, it was, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is the hotel still privately owned, or is it?
It is owned by the state.
Okay.
And I'll tell you a little bit about how we structure everything. The Zoar Community Association runs Historical Village and Fort Orange on behalf of the Ohio History Connection. So Zoar is 14 buildings. The Ohio History Connection owns 12 of them. But they pass the day-to-day operations onto the Zoar Community Association. And the same thing with Fort Orange. They own Fort Orange and the State Memorial. And then Zoar Community Association runs it for the state. So it gets confusing and tangled. So, yes.
And we were also told that quite a few Zoar descendants still live in the area.
Yes, they do. There's quite a few descendants. After they dissolved, a lot went to Canton, Massillon, Cleveland. But they're all, thanks, Di. But they're all still around. The mayor of town, who also works on the garden, he is a descendant.
Yes.
And then there's quite a few that live outside of Bolivar, so we still have quite a few active descendants, and they are still around. There's a lot of Bymillers, which he was the leader, so kind of makes sense that there'd be a lot of them. But Bymillers and Roofs, there's quite a bit of. And even we're starting to get more and more, as people are doing their genealogy and research, we're seeing a resurgence of people discovering that they were the hired hands of Zoar. So they're coming back to do research and check out the census records, because a lot of them stayed in Zoar too. So, yeah.
Do you have any data on, like, when they disbanded the Separatist Society, and how they got, or how many of them actually left, and were they the younger people that, didn't buy in as well as the first people that came over from Germany?
We have some of that, and it's mostly from people that have done genealogy and we find out where their families have gone, and then they share that records with us. But it's just kind of like you said, a lot of the people that were either original separatists or second generation, they stayed right there. And at that point when they were dissolving, a lot of the younger kids went out anyway or chosen not to join the society. So a lot of the younger generation were kind of more scattered. But yeah, so as we get the records in, we can tell you, this person ended up staying right here, that kind of thing. So, and they were very good record keepers, and we just got, which is incredible. You talk about incredible acquisitions. A devotional from 1821 after Joseph Beimiller would do his discourses. So it's a devotional talking about him as a preacher and what they thought of different stuff. So it's really neat, and they stayed German, like it's all in High Schwabian. It's all written in German. Very few of them, like the trustees, or maybe like the store clerk or the hotel, hostess, they spoke English, but everyone else spoke German. So a lot of the documents that we do get, we have to send out for translation, because they're all not only in German, but High Schwabian, which is a very rare form of German. So.
Years ago, I used to go to a bookstore owned by a woman who lived in the house, and she told me that in order to have a business there, you had to live in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Is that still true? And
It is.
are there any other little businesses besides restaurants?
That's still a rule that they have in town. The town has guidelines on businesses, and then the town, now that it's a national historic landmark, there are rules in the historic district as to what you can do to the outside of your house. There's preservation easements. In town, there's actually a couple graphic design companies. There's a hair studio. The bookstore is now becoming a coffee shop. There are 3 bed and breakfasts in town and 3 antique shops. And then there's the restaurant, that's the Firehouse, and then right outside of town where the Inn on the River used to be is the Canal Tavern Zoar. So that's one thing that kind of collectively we're all working together, is to get more businesses and shops in town. So
Still waiting on the ice cream shop. Someday.
How did the religious part of this play out? Was Miller the leader of the religious group? Did they have a minister? Did they have Sunday services? Were there
Miller,
expectations?
Miller was the leader of everything. He was the physician, the preacher, the agent general, kind of the spokesman for the town. So Miller was everything, and they listened to his discourses. But the mystic that they had followed in Germany, he was supposed to have trained under the mystic, under Barbara Gruberman. So they trusted him as the kind of, next Barbara that he had learned from her. He passed away in 1853, and no one took over as pastor. They just read his discourses because people had written them down. So I think that was part of maybe why the younger generation was leaving too, because you didn't actually have a leader up there preaching and speaking to you. You had someone reading what someone else had preached 50 years before. So I think that was but religion was a big part of their life. They had the garden in the center. They lived their life through religion, and they would go to church 2 times on Sunday. They didn't go any other day. They went 2 times on Sunday, and the only person that was excused from church was if a woman was at home starting, supper. But then if she had to miss the morning or the evening, she had to be at the other service. So, and then the children had like a separate, like kind of our equivalent to Sunday school that they would also do on Sundays before the services.
Rules and regulations. Who took care of those? And if some woman didn't go to church at least once on Sunday, what happened?
I think they were all very fervent in their religion, so they didn't have much trouble with people breaking the rules. They had also 12 principles that they lived by, that they all agreed to as a society to live by those principles. There's only one documentation of anybody spending the night in the jail that they built, and that was for drunkenness. And they only ever kicked out 2 people out of the society. And one was the person that ran the inn on the river and the canalers, and they thought that he was being too lenient on them and letting them drink on Sundays, which they did not like. And then his wife was keeping personal trinkets, and so they kicked him out of the society, and he sued them, and it ended up all the way at the Supreme Court. But the separatist won because as you joined the Society of Zoar, you had to sign a document saying that you were signing over everything to them. So.
Can you tell us a little bit about the flood, the levee, and the
Yes.
efforts to save Zoar
Yes,
that you went through?
Zoar became a museum complex in the 1930s because in the 1930s they were going to build the levee system and have all of the Dover Dam, Bolivar Dam. They were building the levee system, so they at the time were going to flood Zoar, and so the people got together and they decided to save Zoar and turn it into a museum complex. So the levee was built around Zoar. They destroyed a couple buildings, but it wasn't nearly as much as what it could have been had they just let the whole thing flood. So then fast forward to 3 or 4 years ago, the same exact issue came up, and the levee was deemed to be failing. So the Army Corps of Engineers said, okay, either we're going to move Zoar or we're going to flood it and destroy it. Everything's still intact pretty much from 1817 to, the 1830s. That's usually when the newest building's built, or, they're Victorian in nature. Plus you have 200 current villagers living there. So the village, the museum, National Trust of Historic Preservation, everyone banded together. It got on the list of the 10 most endangered historic sites in the United States. And everyone banded together, sent postcards to, the state legislator, the national legislation, and they ended up saving Zoar. They decided to save Zoar, repair the levee, and then it usually takes at least 10 years to become a National Historic Landmark. It took Zoar a year and a half because all of this stuff was going on. And so now that Zoar is a National Historic Landmark, the question of repairing the levee or flooding Zoar, that can never come up again because it's a National Historic Landmark and you have to save it. So Zoar is safe for now. We still have issues with some flooding, and we always will, because the levee doesn't so much prevent water from coming up over. What the levee does is it kind of stops the river from backing and flooding into town. So as it does that, it allows water to go into the water table, which the water table is this giant thing that it'll permeate underneath the levee, get in town, and then rise up. So a lot of the basements still get flooded and always will get flooded. But once they repair the levee and do the work, it'll be minimal. But this recent thing that of flooding that we did have, there was 2 foot of water in the sewing house and 3 foot of water in the bi-miller, which was just restored, painstakingly restored. But now there's pumping systems and things in place so that the pressure won't be there to collapse the foundations. But that's just kind of the nature of living by a river. So, yes.
Is the religion still practiced to some extent?
Not
the way they did it.
no. And the church is now a United Church of Christ.
Also, you did say
Yeah.
that.
So, and most of the descendants, and it's different. And they thought, like I said, the world was going to end in the 1830s, and then it didn't. So that kind of defeats your religion right then and there. And the Economist did that too, and their leader, George Rapp, he changed the end of the world about 4 or 5 times before people started leaving the settlement. So, yeah. So I don't know if there's anyone that still kind of follows that. I mean, Amish are technically also separatists, so in a way, that part is still practiced of like the original German separatists, but the actual religion that the people of Zoar is kind of, it's gone. But, yeah.
You mentioned the Amana colony in Iowa. Did anyone leave Zoar to go there?
Yes.
Okay.
They left Zoar to go to Amana and Zoar to go to Economy, and then kind of vice versa too. And they were all, we call them sister colonies because they were all in communication with each other. And there's a really funny document that the people of Zoar and Economy sent back and forth, because in Economy they were completely celibate. And then eventually they got new members by adopting in, even if like as a full-grown adult she would adopt me, just so they could get more people into the society. But they went back and forth because Economy was completely celibate, but they ate pork. And then Zoar at times was not celibate, but they did not eat pork. So then there's a letter going back and forth that someone in Economy is calling out the people of Zoar, and they said, well, one sin of the flesh isn't any better than the other.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just kind of this little,
Let's see. What
this kind of this little funny back and forth they had. But they did have crossover between their members, yeah.
Have you been to both of those?
Not in Mana. I have been out to Economy.
Okay.
Yes.
Amana is amazing.
That's I've heard, yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah, our traveling exhibit's been out there, but I didn't get to take it. But, yeah.